In this short video, I intend to explain in a couple of words 4 forms of ill treatment with regard to the violation of Article 3. These 4 forms from the 5 interrogation techniques through the death row phenomenon and the ill treatment in detention and handcuffing. All these 4 forms you see both in your readings and on the slides, but I thought it might be useful to explain a little bit or put a little bit more emphasis on these because they might not be super obvious. On the slides themselves, I indicated only basic information on the slides. So with regard to the 5 interrogation techniques, why did I put that on the slides and what do I want to draw your attention particularly to is this distinction between torture, the notion of torture and the qualification of torture, and inhuman and degrading treatment again. So to illustrate a little bit more in ill treatment cases, that in the case of torture, the court requires proof of some kind of long-term negative impact on the physical or mental well-being of the victim, or as you see here on slide number 14, as it was emphasized in the case Ireland versus UK, that the 5 interrogation techniques were not qualified by the court as torture, but only inhuman and degrading treatment because they did not occasion suffering of the particular intensity and cruelty implied by the word torture. So that's an example for the court saying that torture is something more serious or the most extreme pole of the violation of Article 3. If the court finds inhuman and degrading treatment, it still qualifies as a violation and the serious violation of Article 3, and still sanctions can be imposed accordingly. But when it comes to the message, and the pressure on the government to refrain from certain activities, obvious like torture is like the reddest button that the court can push. Okay, and on this very slide, you see a reference to the Söring versus UK case, and that's interesting for 2 reasons. One is that the court qualified the death row phenomenon, namely this emotional distress coming with the detention in isolation while the detainee knows that the death penalty is at stake in his or her own case. That was qualified by the court as inhuman and degrading treatment and the violation of Article 3. That is one interesting point of the Söring versus UK case, but the other interesting aspect of this case is that I would like to put emphasis on that this case was basically an extradition case. So Germany was about to extradite the applicant to the United States, where in Virginia the death row and the death penalty would have been enforced and executed. And so this is another important issue to keep in mind, that even if it's about extradition and even if it's another states, and in this case a non-member state's authority who would be responsible for imposing such circumstances on the victim, that would qualify as the violation of Article 3 of the European Convention. Still, that very specific member state of the Council of Europe who is about to extradite the victim to the 3rd state where this human rights violation would take place, that very state who would extradite is responsible under the understanding of the European Court and the European Convention's legal regime for whatever is happening in the third country. So basically, this member state should not extradite if there is the risk that Article 3 would be violated in that third state. Okay, let's go on. I brought into you and I put on the slides two further specific cases. One of them is the Erdogan-Yagis versus Turkey case. And this is a good illustration for the fact that police is not entitled to handcuff automatically or any citizens or any residents in the country who are suspected of a crime or who are not cooperating with the police. So there is this general assumption that police is allowed to do anything when it comes to handcuffing or coercive measures in the streets. It's not true. And even when it comes to handcuffing, it's not automatically acceptable from the human rights perspective. In this very case, it was about a doctor who was affiliated with the police itself. And basically two suspects of a crime of threatening behavior. These suspects involved in a criminal investigation, they accused and wrongly accused this doctor that he was kind of assisting and aiding them in their action on the side of the police. And while the police went to the doctor's house and they arrested him, handcuffed him in public in front of his house, brought him to the police station, to his basically own workplace. So it was extremely humiliating for him. Meanwhile, he was all the time just saying, hey guys, there must be a misunderstanding. Fully cooperated with the police and said, look, I'm working for you. I'm working for the police. There should be something wrong. I mean, I didn't commit any crime, so why do you arrest me? And so on. And still, they brought into the police Yagis, the applicant, and they kept him in detention for 3 days without explanation. And they just then released him saying that, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. But didn't provide him like detailed explanation about, okay, why was I held in prison or in detention for three days? Why was I accumulating in front of my colleagues, in front of my neighbors, handcuffed? Obviously, there was a very negative consequence on his psychological state of mind. And so basically, he was about to be replaced, put back to his earlier position at the police, but he had to be early retired because he suffered from such mental negative consequences. He couldn't go back to the police for work anymore. So there was this long-lasting impact of this restrictive measures by the police. Now, if we apply in this case the regular and general human rights test that you learned about, and we posed this question whether there was a legitimate aim behind the action of the police, we can say yes, there was a legitimate aim behind the action. It was the prevention of escape. There was a suspicion that he was involved in the commission of a crime. So it was legitimate for the police trying to arrest him, trying to prevent the escape. But since he was fully cooperating, he was unarmed, he was all the time just peacefully explaining that, hey, there must be a misunderstanding and I'm following you wherever you want to bring me. There was no need for handcuffing. There was no need for 3 days of detention. And there was definitely no need for taking all these measures, arresting and handcuffing in public, humiliating him. So don't believe if anyone said to you that police can handcuff you under any circumstances. It's not true. Handcuffing, especially when it's committed or done in public, can be subjected to such human rights assessment, and such kind of cases can be brought to the European Court. Now, the last point I wanted to raise is connected to this Thomasy versus France case, where the arrested person was in detention, is in police detention, and after that, after the interrogation of the suspect, of the accused person, he was complaining on physical injuries, and he was medically checked. And so there were medical reports about bruises and injuries on his body. And here I just wanted to emphasize that argument on the side of the authorities or the state in a Strasbourg procedure, that there are no witnesses who could underpin the victim's allegations that he or she was ill-treated by the police or the prison staff. This kind of argument can be easily rejected, is rejected by the Strasbourg Court, the European Court. Why? Because obviously, if you are in detention and no one is around and you are put in a cell and like 4 or 5 policemen goes into the cell with you and there are no other people around, there won't be any witnesses, reliable witnesses. Obviously, one police won't testify against the other police. Or at least it's pretty probable. And there are no independent witnesses who could prove your truth. But if someone can prove that before detention there were no bruises, and after the detention in that very particular cell or police station or prison cell, after the detention there were bruises and injuries, and there are medical records proving that, then the burden of proof shifts to the state in a Strasbourg procedure. So it's the state and the representative of the state who should come up with a plausible explanation for how those bruises were caused, if not by ill treatment. So I hope that it helped you understand these points that were mentioned on the slides as well. Stay with me. See you next week.